Analytical essays. What's the point? So, before you start writing an essay, it's probably useful to think about why you're writing the essay. I know that when I did calculus at school, it would have been more useful for me, and I probably would have paid more attention and not got the appalling grade that I did get in the class if my teacher had actually explained to me that calculus is a very handy language to describe the physical universe, that there is actually a relationship between those equations and those graphs that describes reality. Since he didn't, I was thoroughly bored and did pretty badly. So anyway, analytical essays, probably not as complicated as calculus, but it's worthwhile going back to the basics of why we write them at all. But I think if you understand why you write it, it might help you do a nice job of writing it. So, essentially, that is the reason: to persuade your reader of a work's meaning and or value. Why should we read this text? In your case, this semester, why should you read this poem? Why should someone else read this poem? It's the same sort of thing you do when you come out of a movie theatre. You come out of a movie, you love a movie, you see someone next day, they haven't seen the movie, you say, oh, you should see the movie, yeah, let me tell you why, blah, 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 blah. And you blather on about why they should go and see the movie. So, that's essentially what you're doing in an analytical essay. You're trying to persuade us why we should go and read this poem. Or sometimes persuade us why we shouldn't, although I think it's probably a little bit more easy for you to explain why we should. It's probably best to stick to that for the time being. So, you're persuading your reader of a work's meaning and or value to share your experience of that work with another human being. Sharing your experience. So I want to focus here on the you. You read this poem and you tell me what your experience was. How can you do this? A few very simple ideas, if you can follow them effectively, will help you write very nice analytical essays. First thing, you need to have an idea. If you don't have a good, solid, clear idea about the poem, you will write a crummy essay. Bad writing tends to come from bad thinking, and good writing similarly comes from good thinking. When my students know what they're trying to say, they typically say it as well as they can. When they don't know what they're trying to say, they typically say it badly. So the important thing for you guys to do is have an idea, a nice, solid idea, a theory, if you will, about this work's meaning or value. This poem is about death. This poem is about love. This poem is good. Those are obviously pretty simple theories. I hope you would come up with something a little bit more sophisticated, but that's essentially what you're looking at. A theory that we call a thesis. You've come across that word before, right? A thesis. Your thesis statement is simply a statement of your thesis, a statement of your theory about the book or whatever you're writing about. If it's history, it's going to be a thesis about something else. It's your idea, yeah? One thing to remember, a thesis is not just the thesis statement, okay? You don't just write your thesis statement, cobble together a thesis statement to satisfy the requirements of Mr. Waddington and his rubric, and then move on with the rest of the essay. The thesis is the essay. The whole essay is the thesis. Every single thing you do in that essay should be geared around that thesis. Okay? The thesis is the hub at the heart of your wheel. And I would recommend, since you're not attempting to write an academic book, that you should keep that thesis focused. You're only writing a few pages, okay? So you want to keep that thesis focused. You may have many, many ideas about the poem. You have many, many directions in which you could go. Choose one, choose the best one, and write your essay about that specific idea. The more specific your idea, the better your essay is going to be, because the more in-depth your ideas will be, the less scattered it will be. Also, the more focused your idea, the easier it will be for you to write a nicely focused, clear essay. The more your idea is kind of fuzzy, or goes off in different directions, the more your essay is likely to get scattered. The less it will be, the more difficult it will be for you to hold it all together, okay? And the more you'll fall apart in other areas. So try to keep the idea nice and strong and focused. Next, okay, you've got your idea. Remember what you're trying to do. You're trying to persuade me of your idea. You're trying to persuade me that you've got a good theory. So you need to do what anyone needs to do when they've got a theory. You back it up with evidence. Yeah? When people go to war, they tend to say, hey, look, the evidence is that these people have chemical weapons, these people have nuclear weapons, these people have this, these people have that. That's why we've got to attack them. You don't just go, hey, I feel like having a war today. You've got to give people evidence. If you accuse someone in student council, student council looks at evidence before they make a decision. If there's no evidence for someone's misdoing, or if the evidence is poor, they find them not guilty or can't be ascertained. Okay? So, same thing with this. You've got your thesis, you need to prove it. What is the evidence we use? Textual support, which usually is going to be in the form of quotes. In prose, in essays, in plays and so on, you don't need quotes for all of your points. In poetry, you're more likely to use quotational support. There might be a couple of points you can make without quotes. For example, this poem is a sonnet. That's you don't need to quote the whole poem. But on the whole, you're going to be using quotes to support. A couple of points about using quotes. First off, you're going to have to decide how much is enough support for your point. And that's going to vary. Some points only need, maybe one bit of evidence. If you want to say, this poem is about death, and you quote and you say, because, in his first line he writes, "Death, be not proud." Well, that's pretty solid evidence that the poem is about death. He mentions it in the title, in the first line. If, though, you're saying something like, this poet uses, let's say, language which is very dark, then you might want to use a number of examples. If you say, this poet uses very dark language, and you say, because she uses the word dark once, that's not going to convince me. You're going to have to say, there's the image of the Black Knight, and there's another image of dark, foreboding shadows, and another image of, something else to do with dark that I can't think of right now. You get the idea. So some points need more support than others. You need to choose that, okay? When I taught at St. Martin's, they used to say, every paragraph a student writes needs to have 5 to 8 sentences, and it needs to have 2 quotes, and I thought that was the most ridiculous approach to teaching people how to write an essay I could imagine. That's why I didn't stay at St. Martin's very long. I don't know if they still do it, but it was a silly idea when they did it then, at least. What I want you to do is think for yourself. So I'm not going to give you a certain template. I'm going to ask you to think for yourselves. How much support is enough support for the point you're making? You need to decide that. You also need to decide what is the best support for your point. Some quotes, some points, some pieces of evidence are weaker than others. Use the best, okay? And I will be judging you on the basis of whether you're using best support, If you've got a point and you use kind of weakish support that sort of is okay, it's not going to be as strong an essay as if you used better quality support, and that means hunting for the best stuff. That's probably a little less difficult with poetry because you're writing about a poem and it's very short. When you start writing about Othello next semester, you're going to have to bear that in mind because you're going to have to go hunting for the best support. Your argument obviously needs to make sense. And so it should be a logically organized argument. Okay? Use basic principles of logic to organize your argument. Some things to think about with regards to that. You need your paragraphs to be focused, whether or not they have a topic sentence. I don't care whether you write a topic sentence into your paragraph, into the essays in into the paragraphs in your essay, or not. As long as the paragraph has a focus, I don't mind. Some people require you to have a topic sentence. Okay? And it's certainly good practice when you're planning your essay to jot down topic sentences which represent the focus of each paragraph. It's going to help you stay focused. It's going to help make sure that your paragraph argues one idea. Whether or not you actually use that exact topic sentence, those exact words from your plan in your essay itself is neither here nor there to me. But I should, when I read your essay, be able to read that paragraph and be able to write down one clear statement, a little bit like a thesis statement, that would be a topic sentence for that paragraph. One clear statement that this is the one idea that this paragraph is arguing. Okay? So make sure your paragraphs are focused. If you drift into having more than one idea, again, it'll make the ideas kind of sloppy, the argument seems sloppy. The focus, of course, should support the main thesis. Every single thing you write in this essay should come back to the main thesis. And the order of your paragraphs should build in a logical fashion. Sometimes students ask me which ideas should come first. Well, it's going to depend on the kind of essay it is. Sometimes I find it's useful to begin with arguments in a chronological order. Sometimes, depending on the essay, if it's a kind of an explication essay, I'm probably going to use evidence from the beginning of the poem early on in my essay and use evidence from the end of the poem later on in my essay. Most of the time, though, that's not going to be the case. Most of the time I'm going to be drawing from all over the poem for various paragraphs. In that case, I'm usually personally more likely to use my strongest arguments first. I tend to put the big, strong, longer paragraphs early on in my essay because for me, if you start with your good arguments, you hook your reader. If I'm reading your essay and the first paragraph I encounter is your strongest evidence with a really strong point, you've got me hooked. And then I'm more likely to be carried away as I go through the essay. And if you finish with an argument at the end which maybe is kind of weak and not that strong, then, I'm not going to, I'm still going to be kind of, you've already convinced me. It's just a little bit of lagniappe. If I'm not totally convinced by that final argument, I'm going to still give you credit for it because it's an interesting idea and, you've already proved your point. If you start with your weakest argument or your smallest, which are often your smaller paragraphs, I may not be convinced, and then I sort of start doubting your ideas. So those are some thoughts on how you might arrange it. In terms of number of paragraphs, it still astonishes me that there are students who assume that an essay has 5 paragraphs. An essay does not have 5 paragraphs unless it needs 5 paragraphs. An essay should be as long as it needs to be to write the essay, as long as it needs to be to argue the point you're making in your thesis statement. Okay? Asking how long or how many paragraphs an essay should have is like asking how long a piece of string should be. If I'm using it to tie my shoes, then it'll be a certain length appropriate for tying those shoes. If I'm wearing Lady Gaga boots, it'll be longer. So it depends on whether your essay is Lady Gaga boots or Mr. Waddington's shoes. That'll be the number of paragraphs it needs. Okay? So, 3 body paragraphs is often a nice size. It's enough points to make a decent point. But if you've got another point, then make it. And certainly don't be so convinced that an essay has 5 paragraphs, that you squeeze your extra point into another paragraph just to make sure you've got 5 paragraphs at the end, because all you're going to do is mess up your paragraph and take away its focus. If you've got another point to make another point, add another paragraph, make it a 6-paragraph essay. Fantastic. Some essays that I've read great essays in 4 paragraphs with just 2 body paragraphs. And if you're writing a compare and contrast essay, the chances are you're going to have even numbers of paragraphs. So it might be a 6 or an 8-paragraph essay. It's entirely up to you, depending on how many points you need to argue your thesis. Okay? All right. Finally, you need to make us care. Remember, you're sharing your experience and you're persuading us. So make us care about this. Connect it to the real world. If you connect it to the real world, you'll connect it to things that are part of my experience. Even if I haven't read the poem, I have experiences which make me care about the ideas in that poem and might make me want to read that poem if I'm unfamiliar with it. So, 2 main ways you can do it. In your introductory paragraph, you can give some context, okay? Set the thesis in a broader context. You know, give us a little hook that attracts us to your thesis. And then, even more significantly, at the end, in your concluding paragraph, reflect on the work's significance. Don't summarize in your concluding paragraph. Why would you do that? I've just read all of your ideas. I've read your essay. If you've argued it well, you know, I've got an idea of what your argument is. Why would you then write a concluding paragraph that sums up everything I've just read in the previous 4, 5, 6 paragraphs? You know, it's a silly thing to do. It's pointless. I'm not interested. You summarize, I just read what you said. Tell me something new. Use the concluding paragraph to conclude, to draw a conclusion. Okay? Show me the significance of this work in the wider world of poetry, or in the wider world of literature, or in the wider world of human experience. Show us why the idea that you're writing about is relevant. Why anyone would want to read about that idea. Because it connects to us all. Okay? Think back to what Miss Fowler's talked to you about the hourglass shape of your essay. It starts broad, and then it gets neatly focused on the specific ideas you're talking about in that specific poem, and then it broadens out again at the end. Okay? So, to sum up, you need to have a thesis, and if you don't have a good one, the whole thing's going to fall apart. Start there. You need support. It will not be convincing if you don't give adequate support. Consider what is adequate support. It needs to build a logical argument. If you don't build a logical argument, I get confused, and then I'm less convinced. Reflect widely. Give a wider reflection in your conclusion so the essay matters. And of course, it should all be written with, in Coleridge's words, the best words in their best order, with appropriately clear punctuation and appropriate conventions of citation that you've learned from 9th grade. Okay? If you can pull all of that off, you should wind up with a terrific little essay. Alright? Again, just think about what you're doing. What you're trying to do in this essay is persuade me of this poem's meaning or value.